Well, the time has come for us to revisit CSS units. I know it's not the most glamorous topic or the sexiest thing on earth, but it really is important. We've covered some of them already. Really, we just talked about pixels, px, and then I mentioned, that there were other units we would come back to once we had a reason to. I didn't want to overwhelm you right at the beginning. So this is that time. We're coming back to these units, and we're mainly going to focus on the ones on the left here, relative units. So pixels are the most common absolute unit, as this slide makes clear. By far the most commonly used absolute unit. The other ones I don't think I've ever used in my life, except to explain that they happen to exist. These units, however, on the left-hand side, the relative units, are all relatively commonly used. So we're going to begin with percentages. A percentage value in CSS is always relative to some other value. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a percentage of something, right? So it depends on what that something is, what the property is that we're setting. As an example, if we use width, if we set width to be 50% on an element, we are setting it to be half the width of the parent element. And this can be really useful. If you have some container that's, I don't know, the middle of your page, it's like the main content of your blog post, and it's 800 pixels wide, and then you want something to go 40% of the way across or 80% of the way across, you can use percentages. You don't have to calculate the number of pixels. Then we have other properties where it actually works differently. Instead of being a percentage based upon the parent's value, it's a value from the element itself, and I'll show a demonstration of that. But let's start with the first scenario here, where a percent is relative to the property from the parent. It's pretty common to use a percentage value with width. So let's make a div here, not a dove. Or maybe we'll do a section, and then let's give it a specific width and a background color. I'm working in a new document, by the way. So maybe I'll give it this background color here. So section background dash color, like that, and I'll give it a width that is hard coded as just pixels for now. How about 800 pixels, and a height maybe 800 pixels as well. Okay, let's see what we're looking at. There is my section. So inside of that, I'll add, I guess, just a generic div for now. And this div is going to have a different background color. Background color of, let's steal one of these colors again. Maybe that one right there. Great. And I'm going to give it a width of 50%. And I also need to give it a height. We won't see anything because there's no content inside. So it takes up no space, really. We can't see it. But if I give it a height, I could just do 50% as well. In this case, what I'm saying is I want this to be 50% as wide as whatever the parent element is. And in this case, the parent is the section. And then same thing for height, 50% of the parent's height. And there we go. Half across and half, well, I don't know how to say that. It's 50% width, 50% height of this parent element. And I could do, something different. I could say I want you to go 70% width and 50% height, or 20% of height. These can be pretty useful to use percentages here. Otherwise, trying to figure out that exact number, right, is obnoxious. And of course, if I change that parent width, I make this 400 pixels wide, this is still going to be 70% of whatever that is. So it's a relative unit, and that can be very useful. But as I already mentioned, for some properties, percentages work differently. They are relative not to the parent, but to the font size of the element itself or some other value from the element itself. It really is on a per property basis. But generally, I'd say percentages are most commonly used with things like width and height anyway. So with line height as an example, if our font size on some element is 100 pixels, line height of 50% is not 50% of the parent's line height. It is 50% of the elements itself, its own font size. So I could demonstrate that here. If we take, how about an H1, just CSS units right there. Let's add in a little selector for our H1s and set font size, just to be very explicit, to 40 pixels. Okay, so there that is. And you can see as I select, that's my line height right there. I could also give it border, 1 pixel solid black. Okay, so you can see it there. There's my line height. Now, if I set line height to be, let's say 200%, that should be 200% of the font size for this element. It has nothing to do with the parent. And there we go. And we could calculate that out just to verify. 200%, 40, that should be 80 pixels if I was to be very specific, and nothing changes. So not that common to use percentages in a situation like that, but I just wanted to prove that it does behave differently depending on the specific property. But with width and height, it is referencing the parent width and height. Next up, we've got ems and rems.